you are, and that's okay, but I'm not much of the social media. And I don't hate social media. My wife has it, and I look at it every once in a while. But I'm a bit of a nosy person. Will anybody just like come for me a little bit and say that you're a nosy person? Okay, right. I like to know what's going on in other people's lives, and I'll ask my wife questions. Well, where is that? She's like, I don't care. I'm like, well, I want to know where they live. I want to know I'm a little bit of a nosy person, and I feel like with social media, I would be a little bit too nosy. So I don't usually hang out on there, and today is not, don't hear like I'm against social media in any way, shape, or form. The church has social media platforms, and we use them all the time. But what I have found them to be is hard when it comes to being okay with not being okay. Because I tend to compare myself to what other people go through. Like even I look at in the news and in the media, right? The resounding theme, we talk a little bit about what we talked about last week, how 2020 sucked. Right? We kind of hear that, and it's kind of a drag how bad 2020 was. And I'm encouraging you, this is still the first of the year, and as you begin to look at 2021, last week we talked about having a big expectancy of God. If you missed that, go back and watch it on our website or YouTube channel, that we can expect big things of who God is. But how many of you know how you leave one situation is how you're going to enter another situation? If you leave a job angry, mad, and frustrated, chances are you're not going to enter the next job on the best note. If you leave 2020 angry, bitter, and mad, and frustrated, then you're going to expect that out of 2021. So I'm encouraging you to find what was good in 2020 in your life. Now, don't lie. There was a lot of crap that happened. Let's just be honest, right? A lot of crap happened, but let's move on and let's find out the good that happened in 2020. Like I said, we started Northbridge. Like there's some good stuff going on. I don't know if you got a new job, if you had a new baby, something in your life good happened in 2020. Find it, and let's expect something big in 2021. But when I look at people's social media sometimes, I can get stuck in their stuff that they went through or their good that they went through and wish that mine was that way. I don't know if you come that way, but that's what I do. In one particular social media outlet, Pinterest. Is there any Pinterest fans in here? Okay, a few of you. Apparently it's not as popular as it used to be. That's okay. Here's the thing with Pinterest is great. So here's the definition for those of you who don't know what Pinterest is. This is just the Wikipedia definition. A visual discovery tool that people use to collect ideas for their different projects and interests. People create and share collections called boards of visual bookmarks called pins that they use to do things like plan trips, projects, organize events, or save articles and recipes. All right, is that a fair and accurate definition of Pinterest? Okay, so I like this definition a little bit better. It more speaks what I say. A visually driven social media platform strategically designed for nonstop 24/7 reminders that your kids are not dressed as well as your friends' kids. Your home is decorated like crap. The pictures you take on your phones are comparatively artless. Still goes on. You did a terrible job planning your own wedding, and that you live a generally tedious, monotonous, painfully dull existence that is slowly draining the life out of you and like everyone else in your life whose lives are categorically awesome at all times. Okay. So the point is to not rag on Pinterest. Like, there's a lot of good that can come out of it, okay? So no, don't hear that. Don't hear that. Same with Facebook and Twitter. But the point is, like, sometimes, I don't know about you, but I can take it this way. I can look at people's art projects in their home and be like, man, I don't decorate like that. Right? I'll take it a little personal. I can listen to preachers and I can say, wow, I don't preach quite like that. Or I don't sing quite like that. Or I don't look quite like that. That's just not, right? And I don't know if you ever do that. But problem is we see pictures and we think we can do it just like them, like this, right? So this is a beautiful picture of a wreath that is nice, right? I think it's called a sock wreath. Who makes a wreath out of socks? I mean, people are so, and you may be one of them, and if that's it, awesome. So stinking creative. Who thinks of making a wreath out of socks? Like, I don't understand it, but that's so great. But here's the problem. We make it, and this is what it turns. Okay, I didn't do these, right? So you can go on the web, and you can Pinterest fail all these. So this is what happens. But sometimes we get a picture of perfection, and then we try it, and then this is what turns out. Or we try to make this beautiful picture of garbage. I don't even know what that is. Doesn't look good to me at all. wait a second, don't go yet. Is those onions? What are those things? Okay, thank you. Who eats bell peppers with eggs? Is that normal? Jeez. Okay, but then if I make it, you get to this page, and it's like, right? All right, couple more, right? So, like, everybody loves themselves a good old cupcake and cookie, right? That looks so good right now. It looks fairly easy to make. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But if you try it at home, it'll probably look like this, right? Because that's exactly how they would turn out, right? If I did it, for sure. Worse, probably. I like kids. I got four kids. This picture has two. I have two. Whew. All right, I got 2 kids, and I like these creative pictures. Like, anybody, like, that's super cute. There's 3 girls there. Like, that's super great. Like, oh, that looks fairly easy. You could do that. But then you try it, and it ends up like couldn't even get the clothes on the kids. I mean, come on. The girl is like, Mom, are we done? Horrible. See, sometimes there can be a problem with Pinterest. There can be a problem with us comparing ourselves to other people. And unfortunately, social media drives that sometimes. Now, it can be used for good, so I'm not saying, hey, let's go on a social media I'm not saying any of that. Don't hear that. I'm just saying internally, when you get on those things, or just in life in general. And the problem sometimes what it does is it makes us live in this land I like to call the land of Ur. All right, this is a fictitious land, but this is a land where we live a lot of times because we're looking to other people and we think that they're richer. We think that they're skinnier, or they're smarter, or taller, or prettier, or happier, or healthier, or they're married, or they're happily more married than I am. I don't know if you look at other people like this, but I do, and we begin to say, it's not okay where I'm at, but I wish I had something else, or I wish I was there, and that's what we're going to talk about a lot today. It's comparison and looking in the land of Ur. But it's not only this way. We look to other people who we think are richer, but then we begin to look at people that we think, oh, well, at least I'm richer than them. At least I'm taller than them. At least I'm healthier than them. At least my marriage isn't as bad as them, and I'm married-er. At least I'm married, and I'm not single anymore. At least I'm happier. And then what happens is we become superior. And that's how we begin to act and we begin to feel. And here's the take home today, the big take home today. There is no win in comparison. There's no win in comparison. No win in comparison. Now, I'm not talking about where you see somebody in life and you're like, man, I wish I could be that talented, and then you go to work harder and you get like a good example. That's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about comparing yourself with another individual or another situation. I wish I had their job. I wish I was clean and sober as long as they were. They have it easier than me. I wish I had the opportunities they have, because then my life wouldn't be the way that it is right now. The wisest man in all of humanity, Solomon, back in the Old Testament, God becomes a genie in a bottle to Solomon at one point. He says, I'll give you anything you wish, right? He gets one wish. I don't know where we got the 3, but you get one. So Solomon got one wish, and he, instead of wishing for money or fame or fortune, he wished for wisdom. So he gets wisdom, and he writes some amazing things and does some incredible things where people from all over the land came to him. So this guy is the smartest of the smartest of the smartest. God has given him amazing wisdom. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, he says this. He says, and I saw that the toil and all achievement sprang from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless. Throughout that whole chapter, he's talking about things that he has seen that are meaningless. And he's a bit honest and raw in this book. He's got some ups and some downs, and he's questioning God's, and I love his honesty. He realizes that it's okay to not be okay. But he says this at one point, and it's amazing. He says, this too is meaningless. It's like chasing after the wind. You can't catch it. When you're comparing yourselves among other people, other marriages, other relationships, other jobs. Well, I'm this age. I should be at this point in my life. Because they are. I've looked at some pastor friends and some people I look up to who are younger than me and are more quote unquote successful. And I've talked to Angie and I've been like, man, they're this age. I'm not them. And you're not whoever you're comparing yourself to. He goes on in verse 6. He says, better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Better is less with peace and satisfaction than it is with two hands full of stuff that I'm trying to work my tail off to pay for because I'm just chasing after the wind. And Solomon has it kind of figured out in that way. He says, quit comparing yourselves to other people. Here's a question I want you to wrestle with today. Where do you look to see how you're doing? Where do you look? Where do you look? Now, I think if we were all honest, and I said, hey, I want you to tell your neighbor where you look to see how you're doing, it'd be revealing and it'd be a little embarrassing. I know if I told you, like, honestly, and some of the things I don't even realize, but some of the things that I look to, right? I alluded to it, like other pastors and how cool they are, or how cool I think they are, or other friends who've got more stuff, or neighbors who've got more things. Like, I can look to it. Where do you look to see how you're doing? Because we all do it. We all weigh, well, I'm good because, I'm not like they are. I have two sisters and my parents, and sometimes I'll be honest, I'll look to them and be like, well, I'm not where they are. I'm at least better than, like, I yelled at my wife this week, but at least I'm not my whoever. Right? Where do you look to see how you're doing? Because that's important. That will drive a lot of how we live and what we do. We're going to look at a parable in the book of Matthew where Jesus is preaching a sermon, and he's really preaching about the end days and us being faithful with where we're at and getting ready for God to come back and take us up into heaven with him. And Jesus is alluding to the future. And he says in Matthew chapter 25, in verse 14, if you have your Bibles, I'll give you a second here. You can grab them. You can open up to Matthew chapter 25. You open up on your phones. YouVersion's a great Bible app. If you don't have it, amazing. It'll help you. Matthew chapter 25 and verse 14 starts here. It says, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. Now, Jesus is saying this to people. So God is the man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. Verse 15. He had 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. Then he left on his trip. So here's what I want you to realize in this story is I have it underlined, you're a 2-bagger. Say, I'm a 2-bagger. All right, say it again. Say, I'm a 2-bagger. Okay, so you're the guy with 2 bags. And here's what I mean by that. You are the one, there will always be somebody who you think has more than you have. And there will always be somebody who looks to you as looking at you as you have more than they have. And you may think that that's not true, but it absolutely is. There will always be somebody who thinks and wishes they had the things and the position and maybe the relationships even that you have. I heard a story about Bill Gates. He went on the third world trip. It was many years ago. It was in Time magazine, and he's delivering. I don't know what he's doing, but he's over throughout this particular part of the country, going into some huts and visiting some people, and I think he's really loving on people. But the journalist team was following him, and he went and greeted this lady and shook her hand, and then he left. And the journalist said to this woman, "Did you know who you just met? That's the richest man in America." And the woman looked at the journalist and said, "If you live in America, you're rich." It's a matter of perspective. She would look at any one of us on any stage and say, "You're rich." And on a global scale, if you're an American, you're rich. You're rich. And so we can look at other people and say, "I wish we had what they," but it's a matter of perspective. You will always be, no matter what stage of life you get in, you will always be a 2-bagger. There'll always be somebody. You'll never, let's just be honest, you'll never catch up with the Joneses. If your last name's Jones, I apologize. That's not, hopefully you understand the saying. All right, verse 16, the story goes on. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver, that's you, also went to work and earned 2 more. verse 18, I think. Yep. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used their money. So, it's D-Day. It's the time that we prove our faithfulness. And remember, God is saying, hey, I want you to be faithful. That's what he's talking about. Don't get lost on the money and the fact that whatever's going to happen with the money. Don't get lost on that. Get trenched in the faithfulness. Hear that word. Next slide. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I've earned 5 more. Verse 21. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount. He's the 5 bag. So now I will give you more responsibility, many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. I think it's interesting that he says, the owner says to the guy with the most, this small amount. Right? Everything's proportionate. And the people who listened were like, what? That's a small amount? Verse 22. The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I've earned 2 more. The master said, well done, my good and faithful servant. 24, he goes on and talks to him. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, verse 24, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. You could almost hear a negative sound. I heard you. So he's kind of blaming. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. Verse 26. But the master said, you wicked and lazy servant. Now don't get lost. That's not Jesus calling us wicked and lazy. This is a fictitious story that Jesus is just trying to prove a point. If you knew I harvested crops and I didn't plant, I gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? Verse 28. At least I could have gotten more interest on it. Then he ordered, take the money from the servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. Can we be faithful with whatever God has given us and quit comparing and realizing that it's okay with what we've got? I've worked many different jobs that I hated. We were in ministry for 2 years, full-time ministry. I was a youth pastor at a different church in town here, and they didn't have the funds to keep me anymore full-time. And so, but they still wanted me to stay on very, very part-time. And so I was able to, but I still had to bring home money for the family and the kids, so I had to go out and get a full-time job. And for that year plus, I hated my job. I was incredibly frustrated with why I had to walk away from what I knew was my calling, what I thought was I was supposed to do with the rest of my life, why I had to walk away from that, why was I the low man on the totem pole, the one that had to get laid off, why was I the one that had to... Why I asked all the questions. And then throughout that whole year, I learned a valuable lesson to just be faithful with what God has given me. Now, let's be honest, I wasn't always with the greatest mood and always with the greatest attitude. But eventually I learned that, you know what, this may not be my passion. I sold nuts and bolts. Like, I don't even know what a nut or a bolt is really. Like, I'm exaggerating, but I'm not the handsiest person with those kinds of things. And so why I ended up in that job, I'm not really sure. It's just the doors that opened. But I wasn't passionate about that company. But whoever started it was. My boss was passionate about it. And so I better act like I'm here working for him and I'm going to do what I can. I'm going to be faithful because God put me there. You may be in a place you don't like. You may be in a job that's frustrating. That you know, this is not my end calling. Can you be faithful where you're at? And more importantly, can you be faithful, but can you be content and can you be happy? Because if you're not happy where it's not perfect, you're not going to happy where you think it is perfect. Can you be content where you're at? And I'm not saying be satisfied. You can always drive for more and dream big. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying wherever it is that God has put you, can we learn to be faithful? The quickest way to get out of a situation you don't like that, is to be faithful where you're at. In that marriage, that you may think that the other party in your marriage is frustrating and not doing their part, you be faithful. You do your part, and God will do amazing miracles. When I was a kid growing up, there was a lady in our church who had a husband who wasn't serving God, and she had been praying and praying and praying, and I think it was 10 plus years that she was praying for her husband, and he was downright cruel to her about coming to church, and he would mock her, and it was just an unhealthy situation. But like 10 or 15 years later, she was praying and she was praying. He came to something, his life got turned around, and he was on fire for God, but she was faithful in loving him. She was faithful in praying. She did what she could do. Doesn't mean your situation's perfect. Doesn't mean everything is going to be rosy, but you can be faithful where you're at. Because if we're not, we're in a sense saying, I'm not okay where I'm at. Like, I'm not okay being here. Like, how frustrating has COVID been for you and your work and your family? And for us as a church, how frustrating has this virus and everything around it been? But can we be faithful with this small building that God's given us? Can you be faithful with whatever job it is that you have and prove and say, God says, okay, now I can give you more? Can God give us more when we're faithful with our recovery ministry? And we're faithful with the food bank? And we're faithful with whatever funds God has given us? Can we do that? Because every minute we spend comparing ourselves to somebody else, we are inadvertently accusing God of shortchanging us. Like that guy in the story, he says, I was afraid because I knew you didn't do this. I knew you had it. Have you ever said to God, how come I'm in this situation, in an honest moment? Maybe you haven't said it out loud, but maybe in your heart, maybe deep down, and said, God, it's your fault that I'm going through this. Like I tithed. I did this, and I still went bankrupt. I did all the right steps, and I still fell back on my addiction. It's their fault. It's your fault, God. Instead of saying, hey, here's what you gave me, and here's what I did with it. Can we be faithful with what we have and realize it's okay to be imperfect? It's okay to just use what God has given me, whether it's 2 bags or 5 or 600 or 4 or 2, however you measure it. Whatever it is, can you be faithful with what you have? Because maybe on some level when we compare, when we look at other people, when we compare, maybe on some level we're saying, I don't know that God's okay with me not being okay. God, are you okay with me without the stuff? Because I need the stuff to make me feel better, because then I know God will approve of me. But somewhere deep down, am I saying, I know, God, that I'm okay and you love me just as I am? Galatians chapter 4. Verse 6, Paul is talking to the church of Galatia, and he says, we're his children. We're God's kids. God has sent the Spirit of his Son in our hearts. He has sent Jesus, prompting us, promoting us, encouraging us to call out, Abba, Father. That word is translated better, Daddy. I don't know if you have young kids, but I have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old. I have 2 kids, not 4. I have no clue where that came from. And Bodie got hurt this week a little bit, fell and hit his head, and nothing serious, but just kind of got hurt. And when they get hurt and they cry, and they scream out, Daddy or Mommy, there is nothing that we're doing that's more important. We're going to drop it, and we're going to go run to them, and we're going to hold them, and we're going to love them, and we're not going to say, why did you do that? We're going to hug them, and we're going to comfort them, and we're going to love them. And if your kid has ever been in need and they've just yelled out, Daddy, or if it's just everything's fine and they yell, Daddy, I don't know if you've ever felt it, but it just melts your heart. This genuine feeling of, I need you. I can't do this without you. I love you. That's what we are saying when we cry out, Abba, Father. Now you're no longer a slave, but God's own child. And since you are his child, God's made you his heir. You're God's kid. You are God's kid. And that may be hard to fathom on some level, but it's as if God is saying, you're fine because you're mine. You're completely fine because you're mine, not because of how you've acted, not because of how you've lived or not lived, not because of the choices you've made, but you're completely fine because you're mine. And I love you. Now, all of us understand the concept of being parents and what it is, and we all have flaws and we all have mistakes, but I think we can agree that God is the perfect parent, correct? God is the perfect father. And the perfect father would never, good parents wouldn't, but a perfect father would never compare you to another one of his kids. And I don't know if you've ever heard this from a parent or somebody you loved or trusted, and if you have, I'm apologizing for them. But if you've ever heard, I wish you were more like brother, sister, friend, dad, mom. Maybe you've heard that. Jesus does not say that to you. You're completely fine because you're mine is what Jesus says to us. The perfect father does not compare his kids to anyone else. So why do we compare ourselves to others? When we do that, we're in a sense saying, God, you haven't given me what I need in order to do what I think I should. But here's what we do when we're in trouble. Here's what we do when we're lacking. Here's what we do. We do what the guy did, right? In verse 24. We say this to God. Jesus, I know you require something. I'm putting my own words here, right? I know you require something of me. I know you demand me to be holy and blameless and spotless, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I get scared that the phone's going to ring. Perfect timing. Love it. Oh, man. Yeah, it's okay. I was afraid that I would lose it, so I hid. I was afraid that you would find out who I really am. I was afraid that you would find out my faults and my failures. So I hid. I ran away. I don't want anybody to know who I am. And last week we talked a little bit about it. Honesty and coming forward with whatever you have and face. That's what this series is all about. It's okay to not be okay. God is saying, don't hide it from me. I already know it, and I am welcoming you. And I work primarily through other people, and I want to love you through other people, and I want to love you through imperfect people, because we're all imperfect. But don't be afraid and hide it. Here's some real quick takeaways today. Come out of hiding. Find somebody you can talk to. Find somebody you can be honest with and real with. Let me tell you, Northbridge is a place of non-judgment. We've all got hang-ups. We've all got issues. We've all been through it. Nothing you could say to any one of us will surprise us. We love you. Recovery is a great place to come on Thursday nights. It doesn't mean you're admitting you got issues, but you kind of are, because if you come here, we all got issues. And we're going to work through them and love each other, coming together. Come out of hiding, and somebody can do that. You can do that, start that today. Just say, I need something. You can seek connection, not comparison. Right? Seek a relationship with somebody, not the moment you meet somebody, how do they measure up? What kind of clothes are they wearing? Is that a cool hat? Do they have, what kind of job do they work? I'm going to compare what I've got with what they've got, because that's how I base how I'm doing off of. Number 3, what is it? I forget. Yep. See the blessing where you are. How easy is it to get lost on what we don't have and what we need, but see the blessing in where you're at. And I don't know how many times I get stuck on it. It's just the phase of life I'm in, but the building's too small, the carpet's too stained, the property's too far out there. I'm going to be thankful that we got a building that's paid for. I'm going to see the blessing where I am, and I get stuck in it all the time. and I compare myself to other church plants and other people, and man, I got to stop and be okay with where I'm at, okay with it. And the final one is pursue Jesus, not perfection. Because perfection doesn't exist, right? I think we can all say that right now. Perfection doesn't exist. And what you see on social media or what you think you create in your mind about someone else is not perfection. It's not real. Most of the things, right? How many of you post and some of you might, how crappy of a day you had? Like, we don't post some of the negative things of our life. Sometimes we do, and that's fine and well. But for the majority of it, people post all the good stuff, the filters, and everything they can. They use the filters. Can you post a filter? I don't know. Pursue Jesus and not perfection. Eric's going to come on up. And I think it's important that we realize, first and foremost, that we're not going to compare ourselves to other people, but we're going to compare ourselves to Jesus and his love, because his love is perfect for us. Now, don't compare yourself on how good Jesus was. Compare yourself with who he was, because he came and he took our place, and he was righteous for us. So he was perfect, and he became us and took on our sins. So now, in a sense, we are perfect because of him. We live in his name. We live in who he is. We live in his righteousness. And so we're going to accept his love and his grace today. I want to give you a moment. Bow your heads with me. And I want you to just examine yourself for just a second. I want you to ask yourself the question, where do I look to see how I'm doing? Where do you look to see how you're doing? Be honest with God, because he already knows it. Is it your neighbor? Is it your boss? Is it your best friend? How well their kids are dressed? How well they look like they're dressed? How many pounds they've lost this week? The new car they just bought? Or how great their marriage is? How happy they look? How funny they are? Their husband's funnier than my husband. Their wife's sweeter than my wife. I don't know what you ask. Where do you look? Today I want to ask you to, when you do start to look to someone else, catch yourself and say, I'm going to look to Jesus. There's a great story in the New Testament that you're maybe aware of. It's another parable where Jesus is saying, there's 100 sheep. If one goes away, am I not going to run after that one? Am I not going to be satisfied with you, who you are? Like, you're running away, but I'm still going to run after you. There's nothing that's going to stop me to come and get you. I'm going to leave the 99 good ones and I'm going to come chase the one. That's you. And that's what Jesus does for us. His love is an unabandoned, crazy, can seem at times reckless for you. Can you know and rest in the fact that you are fine, Jesus says, because you're mine? Anytime you compare this week, can you say, nope, I'm fine because I'm his. I'm going to rest in his love for me. His overwhelming